right, cool. Thank you. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? All right, awesome. So today I'm going to talk about this concept of quantifying human risk, seeing if that's something that's even doable and how we can potentially do it. But just to give a very slight background of myself, I happen to find myself in cybersecurity, but really have more of a math and statistics background. So I consider myself like a data scientist, data analyst, statistician, and that's what I went to college for. This reminds me a lot of being in college, being in a lecture professor hall like this. But I, in another world, would have loved to also major in like psychology or something, because I think it's so fascinating why people make the decisions that they make, which will kind of be a bit of what this talk gets into. But just bear in mind throughout this this presentation that yes, I have been in cybersecurity the last 7 years now, but if it's a lot more data and people focused, that's kind of why. And I think that we need that intersection between disciplines sometimes. So today, I'm going to start off with a definition, and then I'll try to be way less boring than that the rest of the talk. What is human risk management, right? It's basically this concept of how can you respond to human-caused risks or incidents in your organization, right? So when someone clicks on a phishing email, or they do something that they shouldn't be doing, or they're browsing to insecure websites, or doing all these things, right? Human-caused risks in your organization. So this concept of human risk management is a bit of a newer term, I guess, in the industry. Just looking at more of a holistic approach of how can we manage that human risk that all the employees at our company are bringing. So historically, what has this looked like? AKA, what does every single bank, healthcare, any company do for human risk management? I would say it's very compliance-driven activities. So it's usually simulated phishing emails and annual security awareness training, right? Everybody does that. It's pretty simple, pretty easy stuff. I've really yet to come across an organization that doesn't do at least those two things. And like I said, I would say it's much more of a compliance-driven approach, right? It's something that people have been doing for 10 plus years. I don't really think the world of security awareness training and phishing has evolved that much in terms of just simulated phishing. It has a bit, but this is really like your basic security awareness training. I would think that everyone does this. We've seen content get a lot more maybe engaging, a lot funnier. I know that, I think some of the content libraries like KnowBe4 and stuff hire SNL actors and stuff to do these annual security awareness training videos, right? But for the most part, it's still just really these two activities. So what I really want to talk about, though, is this idea of human risk quantification, which sounds like a big thing. So I want to break it down a little bit into what is human risk quantification? What is this next idea of how we can evolve this management of human risks? So if we break this down bit by bit, start with risk, okay? So what is a risk, right? I personally think that if you had a room of 50 GRC or risk folks, every single one of them would have a different definition of what a risk is, and they would all think each other is stupid for their definition. So my personal definition, agree or disagree, of a risk, well, a risk in cybersecurity to me is just like a risk in life, right? Where the way I would describe it is a risk in life is anytime you're doing something, but you don't necessarily know what the outcome is, right? Like there's some type of unknown outcome. And the reason I say that is because, if I'm going to go skydiving and I think my parachute is going to open, but I'm not 100% sure because I can't look into the future, right? I am taking a bit of risk with that. It's a slightly, at least, risky decision. Whereas if I'm turning left or right on a highway for no particular reason, that's more of a decision. I know the outcome. I'm either turning left or I'm turning right, right? But a risk is something where there might be a decision involved, but you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So a risk in cybersecurity where we don't know if we're going to get breached, we don't know if, a phishing email is going to come in, this and that. It's kind of the same in life where there's just unknowns, right? Which whenever we're talking about unknowns, it kind of brings up this question of, can we possibly measure or quantify an unknown? It sounds like a bit of a weird thing, right? If we're saying inherently that risk is something unknown, then how could we possibly measure or quantify that, right? So let's get into the next part of this human risk quantification, which is the bigger and scarier word, quantification, right? And what does that exactly mean? So for that, I want to take a little sidetrack, and let's look at a risk matrix like this, which probably everybody has seen in their life. Probably every organization to some extent still uses this type of risk matrix, right? So you're rating something on a low, medium, and high, a green, an orange, a red scale. Now, a lot of you would easily say, okay, low, medium, and high. We know quantitative means numbers, right? We know that that's not a quantitative approach. Okay, but what if we rated on a scale of 1 to 5, right? Is that a quantitative approach? So we say, 1 would be super unlikely and 5 is very likely. Okay, so now a lot of people might say, well, that's moving to a quantitative approach, but let's take one more step into that. And let's say that I'm a data analyst who is tasked with understanding my risk of getting breached in the next year. And I decide, well, it's always better to ask 2 people versus 1 if I'm trying to get these estimations. So I'm going to ask my CTO and my CISO, what do you think our chance of getting breached in the next year is on a 1 to 5 scale? And they're like, okay, so they're thinking. So the CISO's like, yeah, we've been doing a pretty good job and we've been implementing all these new things and these controls. And the CISO's thinking to themselves, and they're like, there's probably like a 3% chance that we get breached in the next year. So they'll rate that a 1 on a scale of 1 to 5. Okay, great. And then I go and talk to the CTO, and the CTO's like, well, the CISO's an idiot, and this and that, and all these attacks, and blah, 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 right? And they're thinking to themselves, well, there's probably like a 17% chance we get breached in the next year. Okay, so they rate that a 1 on a scale of 1 to 5. So both the CTO and the CISO are in agreement that there's a 1 on a scale of 1 to 5 chance we get breached. But, as us in cybersecurity know, there's a very big difference between a 3% and a 17% chance of something happening, or that you get breached in the next year, right? And so this is an example of something actually not being quantitative when it seems like it is, right? It's introducing what we call analysis placebo because of this idea of range compression, where because we're compressing into these ordinal ranges, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we're actually taking precision away from the measurement, right? We took away the precision from 3 to 17%. Whenever you have something like that going on, it means you're not necessarily looking at something quantitatively in nature. And I promise this will come back and be relevant in a minute. But that's this idea of what we call actually an ordinal scale, right? It has an implied order, kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, red, yellow, green, but it's not quantitative in number or in the nature. And something can be a numerical ordinal scale where it uses numbers as those 1 through 5, but it's still ordinal. And the best way to identify if you're using one of these scales, if you can replace 1 with improbable, and 2 with seldom, 3 with occasional, right? 4 with likely, 5 with highly likely. If you can replace whatever numbers you're using with some type of word or symbol, then it's probably not a quantitative scale. So just to call out why non-quantitative scales can be even worse, let's say I'm using this risk matrix and I'm looking at risk A and risk B. So risk A has a likelihood of 50% and an impact of $9 million. Risk B has a likelihood of 60% and an impact of $2 million, right? Simple, expected loss, super easy to calculate. We can see risk A is 4.5 million versus risk B being at 1.2 million. But now, if we're using non-quantitative scales, right, like a risk matrix, just like the one behind me, which I didn't do anything weird or crazy to, you can see risk A gets rated a medium and risk B gets rated a high. So now not only are we taking away precision in our measurement, like in the 3 to 17% example, but we're actually getting a worse understanding of our risk just because we're not using quantitative scales, right? And the reason that happens is people start using 1 through 5s, thinking they're quantitative, and then adding a 1 plus a 2 to get a 3, which is like adding 2 regular users to get an admin user, right? You can't actually do math like that. So it starts to really throw off measurements. We'll get back to that. Okay, so we covered risk, we covered quantitative. Let's talk about humans for a minute. I'm going to take another little side venture here, and I just want to talk about if you've stayed at a hotel before, okay? And I travel a lot, I stay at a lot of hotels, right? And in the bathroom, you'll typically have a plaque like this, and it's like, help us save the planet, reduce, reuse, recycle, whatever. Don't wash your towels. Or like, if you leave your towel on, or if you hang your towel back up, we won't wash it. It's great. So you guys have probably all seen this in like every hotel. And Well, I would love to think that hotels really care about our environment and being green. The reality is they really want you to reuse your towel because it saves them a lot of money, right? They don't have to now wash a towel. They're not paying for the labor to do that. They're not paying for the water, the electricity. So it's very advantageous for a hotel for you to reuse your towels. So they've got these plaques everywhere, right? And they did this experiment, an A/B study a hotel did, where they took half of the hotel rooms and then the other half of the hotel rooms, and they put the plaques in, but just with different wording on each of the plaques, right? And anyone who was staying at the hotel didn't know this experiment was going on. So just a blind A/B study. Okay. So in half of the hotel rooms, they wrote 75% of guests in this hotel reused their towels, okay, on half the plaques. In the other half, they wrote 75% of guests in this room reused their towels. Okay, so literally a one-word difference on a plaque that I don't think anybody really reads, or at least I know that I don't. So you would think, of course, changing one word on a plaque that nobody reads wouldn't have any effect on human behavior. But of course, I wouldn't be showing you this example if that were true. So if we look at the results, when the plaque said in this room, the hotel guests used on average 1 towel per person. And when it said in this hotel, they used on average 1.6 towels per person, which might not seem like a lot, but statistically, this is a 40% reduction in towel usage. Okay, so why am I bringing this up? This shows unequivocally that changing one word on a plaque that not that many people read can affect human behavior by 40%. Okay? So why do we care about this in cybersecurity? Well, for years and years and years, we've all seen statistics that say 82 or 85 or 83% of breaches are caused by humans, right? Or there is some type of human enacted cause for a breach happening. The Verizon data breach report, the IBM cost of a breach report have all showed these statistics year over year. And not only are 80+% of breaches being caused by the human element, but that number is not trending down, which tells us very importantly that we are failing to understand human behavior in cybersecurity. If we're saying that something as simple as changing one word can affect human behavior by 40%, then why aren't we fixing that number? Why is that 80+% not coming down, right? And this all loops back to because we're using those traditional techniques of phishing simulations, security, annual security awareness training, and clearly the data is showing us that it's not working, right? So let's get back to human risk quantification. How can this help us use data and use human behavior to potentially change that 82% number? So I'm not saying we need to stop phishing simulations and security awareness training. They're probably going to be required by insurance and compliance-driven things for a long time. We can keep those, it's fine. But we need to start moving to this 2.0 approach and moving away from just basic security awareness training to human risk management, which involves adding some type of metrics framework. So starting to actually gather all the data of what humans are doing in your environment, right? Can we see the data on when someone is actually browsing to an insecure website? Or when they send an unencrypted password in Slack? Or what about when they, of course, click on a phishing email or a simulated phish, right? All of these behaviors that people are doing that are introducing risk into your environment, we should be looking at and analyzing from a quantitative standpoint. So imagine the way, I actually don't know if this is a thing in the UK, crap. In the US, we have credit scores. Do you have credit scores here? Okay. Panicked for a minute there. Okay, credit scores. Yes. Okay, so imagine that, it's a really good analogy, but imagine the way that every single person has their own credit score, right? And it's impacted by different things, assuming they're the same as the US, it's impacted by hard inquiries on your credit and the amount of debt you have and if you pay off your credit card on time and all of these things, right? Different factors that go into giving you a quantitative credit score. Imagine if we had the exact same thing for every single person who worked at your company, right? A risk score. So based on if they're browsing to insecure websites, if they're sending unencrypted passwords in Slack, if they're sending data to a Gmail address to themselves so they can work on something at home, right? All of these things, we should be gathering that data and creating a risk score for every single person that you can look at. And say, not only based on what they're doing, but then imagine if we also added in, well, what do they have access to, right? Are they a system admin? Are they access, do they have a bunch of different AD groups they're a part of, right? And we can actually start to get, for each person, how much risk are they bringing into your environment? Because there was another study done that showed that of those 82% of security incidents that are caused by humans, on average, they were caused by only 8% of people at a company, meaning that at your company, 80% of things you have to deal with are caused by 8% of people, right? So person 1 doesn't need the same training as person 2. And they don't need as much time and attention depending on what they're actually doing and what they actually have access to. And then thinking about a culture change, all right? And what I mean by this is that if we go back to the reason humans make the decisions they make and human psychology, this human aspect of it, people tend way more likely to listen to and respond to people that they hear from often in their lives, right? So when your boss tells you to do something, you listen to that. It's normal. It's not something that you feel like you don't need to understand because your boss tells you to do something every day. Well, what if I'm in HR and, my CISO sends out another email about, say, October Security Awareness, Cybersecurity Awareness Month and do all these great things, right? I'm not saying I'm not going to read it. It's from a C-level. Maybe I will, but it's not part of that daily workflow for me, right? It almost goes into a different part of the brain. Whereas imagine instead that I have my boss, my HR manager consistently telling me to do things, or I have, my boss or the person sitting in the cubicle next to me reminding me about security things. It registers in our brain a different way when we hear it on a daily basis from people we're used to hearing things from. And on top of that, imagine if I'm a brand new HR intern and I accidentally think that I did something bad, cybersecurity wise. I think I clicked on a fish or something, but I'm scared to go talk to my big bad cybersecurity department because they're going to get mad at me and they're going to wipe my laptop and this and that. Well, what if instead, in my HR department, we had one designated cybersecurity person, right? And it was our HR admin or whoever it was, but they were the dedicated person for our department who knows what to do in a cybersecurity situation. And imagine if finance had one and accounting had one, right? And payroll and all these things. So that you have someone who's not scary, who sits in the cubicle next to you or who you IM every single day, who you can ask questions when they come up. So you're much less turned off by going to, the cybersecurity department or potentially getting in trouble. And then from there, it's also just sustainment, right? Things got to come from the top. You've got to have funding to do a program like this. You've got to have, executive backing, things like that. But again, really moving beyond just that 1.0 approach of annual cybersecurity awareness training and phishing to more of a human risk management overall appetite. And again, what kind of data can we pull in to look at things like that if we're talking about quantification? Well, we should be pulling from your web and endpoint security tool, right? Are people attempting to install unauthorized software, mobile device updates, detection of malware, phishing and email security? Again, not saying we shouldn't do phishing simulations, right? Still something good, but we should be pulling in that data as well. What about data loss in your DLP, right? Are you attempting to send a Slack, like I said, with an unencrypted password? Well, what if when you do that, you get a little Slack pop-up that says, hey, looks like you just tried to send an unencrypted password in Slack. Please use this approved method next time. Thanks, your cybersecurity team, right? So now instead of getting an hour-long training on January 1st, which you'll have forgotten all about by January 5th, right? You get 2-second reminders day to day on actual behaviors that you need to change. It's much more effective in actually changing human behavior. Same with security awareness training, right? We got to move away from 1 hour training in the beginning of January. Humans on average can retain 7 bits of information in their short-term memory, maybe a bit more in their long-term, I don't know, but trying to train someone for an entire year's worth in 1 hour at the beginning of the year is absolutely ineffective. We need to move to more of a nudge-based real-time approach. So, the point pretty much of my whole talk. Humans were really not optimal people, and it's really, really interesting and fascinating if you look into it, but we basically make really bad choices. We don't operate like computers. We don't follow algorithms. We're emotional. This is a really interesting study, but we tend to act against our own best interest as human beings. So it's the reason you say you want to lose 5 pounds and then you eat a cheeseburger for dinner, or why I set my alarm for 7 a.m. this morning so I could go on a run and I slept until 8, and that really happened, right? Would it have been better for me to run this morning? Absolutely. I didn't. humans, we're not optimal people. We act against our own best interests all the time. And we need to start understanding that better and genuinely understanding the psychology behind why people do the things they do in cybersecurity. Because I just think way too much emphasis has been on the technology. And not that none should be. Technology has made very, very large advances in the last few years. Controls are getting more sophisticated. Frameworks have come a long way. But I don't know. I don't think that we focus quite enough on the human aspect. And that's reflected in the data. Like I said, if 80% year over year of incidents are caused by humans, then clearly we're failing to understand human behavior. So I'll leave with like an interesting note. I gave this presentation once before and someone asked me, do you think that being quote unquote bad at cybersecurity, like if your risk score, if I'm an accountant and my risk score was bad enough, should be a fireable offense, right? Should you be able, it's a very divisive question. I think people have very different opinions on it. But what I would say is if we are all in cybersecurity and that's our job is to protect the company and even protect end users and their own data too, right? How come we just think, well, we should fire that person. They failed enough phishing attempts in a row. They're clearly not getting it. They're clearly not learning. We need to let them go. I think maybe we should take that as a little bit more of a reflection on us, the job that we're doing and us in cybersecurity and say what we're doing to train this person is clearly not getting through to them. We're not understanding the way they learn. We're not understanding the way they work and their workflows. Now, not to say if they're malicious in intent, of course, when they're doing that, then sure, get rid of them. But if they're just genuinely not learning because of the way that we're trying to teach, then maybe it needs to be more of a reflection on us and how we can take psychology a little bit more into mind when we're coming up with different cybersecurity measures. But yeah, so that's my talk. I threw my LinkedIn on up there. But yeah, I guess I'll take questions if there are any. Otherwise, thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
I like that about the human psychology because when I first started getting spam phishing campaigns, I used to try and click it to see if there was the one that I was trying to click that they were trying to catch me out on. So does anybody have any questions? Yeah, hang on.
I will say, just to add on to that point while they're walking over there, the only phishing simulation that I failed in like the last 2 years of my company, and my CTO is mean about them, to be fair, but we had a part of our company that got acquired by a different company, so all the employees were going with it, so they were all leaving, and they sent out this like, say goodbye to the Pillar employees email and like a link to see like a goodbye picture or something, and actually at the time I had just traveled to the UK, so I was on like 6 hours jet lag, and it was like right before I went to bed, I said, I'll click this and look at the cute little picture before I go to bed, and it got me. So like preying on an emotional response can be very, very effective.
Sorry, on the towel debate thing, 40% you said, and reduction on. Can you explain the math behind me because I couldn't get it from your slide?
Okay, maybe I did the math wrong, but like if you have 1.6 to 1, is that not a 40% reduction in towel usage? Is that wrong? Isn't it? 40%, right? No? Is it not?
I don't know. That's what I was asking.
Well, it would be, okay.
What was it? The room used one towel, and the hotel used 1.6 towels.
Right.
Per room. Okay.
Yeah. 6 times 0.6. The same of 1.6 isn't 6, isn't 0.6. It's close.
I don't know. Maybe I did it wrong. I don't know. It's a reduction in towel usage by 0.6 towels per person. Leave it at that.
0.6 towels per person.
0.6 towels per person.
All right, thank you. Sorry, it's just...
Yeah, I might have just done that wrong, not gonna lie.
It might be my maths. It's a reduction. It's about 41% reduction. Okay.
Sorry, I made these slides a while ago. Not gonna lie.
Any other questions? Yep, I couldn't see it. I'll come to you, and then I think we're nearly at time. We've got a bit.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
So you did mention those before briefly. Are they, do you view them as a competitor within this space? Because they're certainly moving on in this area as well.
Yeah, so I've spent the last year like really looking into a lot of the tech in this space because my company, we're a vendor agnostic company, so I always just try to keep up on all the tech and see what's best. I think KnowBe4 is more on the traditional side, a little bit too much on the 1.0 side. I think they're trying to do like a little bit of this, but they are not at all what I would call a leader in this space. Most of them honestly are startups because it's like a newer thing, this whole risk quantification and all of that stuff. So as far as UK-based companies, I know the biggest ones are Culture AI, CybSafe, and Outthink are the three that I come across a lot. I like Culture AI the best just from what I've vetted. And then in the US, we've got like Right Hand Security, Living Security, but really they're all startups for the most part.
KnowBe4 have got a risk measure.
They're starting to try to do it.
And then it's based on job titles as well.
So yeah, they're starting to try to do it. I know they are. They're just not as advanced in the space. Like they're typically not pulling in DLP data. They're not pulling in SIM data. They're not pulling in like IAM. Like they're not pulling in a lot of the other data where a lot of these other companies like Culture AI, for example, that's the main thing they're doing is integrating with your other products to get a holistic risk score. So, from what I've seen in the space, it's still a lot of startups, but I think they're really interesting. I know, for example, Culture AI just got their Series A. I think CybSafe might be even further along than that. So it's growing for sure, but it's a newer product industry. Cool. I don't know if I have time. I don't think. Maybe do I have time for any other questions? Yeah.
Hi. I just have a quick question about you mentioning a potential solution to keep reminding users or employees about their security posture. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned like potentially having certain like notifications coming in saying, "Oh yeah, you sent this." Mm-hmm. Don't you think that might cause sometimes, in some cases at least, some fatigue in the alerts? Because that could happen where users will just completely ignore that. Yeah. Is there maybe like a middle ground that someone should aim for, or what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I definitely think it could cause fatigue, 100%. I know a lot of the products that I've seen that do it, you can set a threshold, right? So it could be like maximum alert this employee 3 times a month or whatever it is. So you can always see that. But it's really interesting. I mean, I've talked to CISOs and companies who are like, spam the crap out of them, alert them every time they do anything, gamify it, send them an email once a month that says, hey, of everyone on your team, you're in second to last place in terms of having the worst risk score. Like, there are CISOs who absolutely want to do that. They want to gamify it. They want to prey on that psychology. And then there's CISOs who go the exact other way, right? Where they're super worried about the big brother aspect, the gamification, all that stuff. So I almost think it's more set as your organizational culture is typically how I see it. It's almost like a culture thing for your org. I see some that do also more of the positive reinforcement model. So where like the better risk score you have or the more trainings you do or this and that, like I saw one company that you could gets points and you can redeem it for like a pint of Guinness or stuff like that, right? So it depends on the culture usually that your CISO wants to set for your security org.
So, is it up? Yes. All right, thanks. So when I've been doing information security awareness training with people, what I've typically found is that people in an organisation will have a different interaction and relationship with technology than they do at home. And what I've tried to tend to do is fix their relationship at home, because then that bleeds into their work life. Do you think that's maybe a way that we should maybe be looking at this? So that people that, rather than battering them with, don't do this at work, is teach them how to be more secure at home, because then that will affect their relationship with technology in the business.
So I love this question. I totally agree with it. There's actually an initiative I'm working on right now that I wanted to try to fit into this, but I couldn't figure out how. But it relates a lot to that, where I work with like credit unions sometimes, and a lot of credit unions will have the issue of, if an older person, it's like a romance scheme or, a fraud or something like that, right? That we've all heard a lot historically about, where now they're taking this $20,000 check to their credit union to try to get it cashed, and they're almost like embarrassed to say why. They won't even tell the credit union. So I don't know if you guys have credit unions here now. I think of like banks or whatever. But so it was a big thing. But what was interesting in talking to the most recent credit union is they were like, honestly, the losses that we take from that each year are manageable. It's really not that big a deal. But their CISO cared more about just the impact it had on their customers. They were like, we have seen people be devastated. We've seen their lives ruined. We've seen this and that, right? And further, on top of that, a lot of the money, which I think a lot of people don't even realize, that is stolen in these scams ends up supporting drug trafficking, human trafficking, really criminal activities, right? So the initiative that we're working on is actually trying to give more awareness of those things and saying, how much can we save a company due to like mitigating this human risk, right? And can we use those savings actually to then donate to these human trafficking or drug like organizations, right? Or anti-human trafficking, anti-drug organizations. Sorry, let me clarify. But the reason I bring any of this up is because I think it preys more on people's emotions, right? So I go to conferences all the time. I see sponsors giving away these like $200 gift cards for entering a raffle for the booth and whatever, and or like a $200 bottle of whiskey or something. Well, what if we donate $200 to anti-human trafficking orgs instead or something, right? And I bring all of that up to say what I think is a really effective way to do it is not only teaching them, like you said, more on their at-home behavior, but the effect it can have on their personal life versus just their corporate life, right? So say, hey, if you fall victim to one of these schemes, like, here is what I have seen it do to someone of your age in your position, right? And there's a million stories of them. If you don't have one, you just ask any of your coworkers in cyber and someone will have a story of a family member or something getting extorted from this, right? So I think personally, I'm just starting to try to launch that initiative, but if we can pray more on like the actual end effects that it has on people's lives and their personal lives, like you said, I think it's way, way more effective than just saying, hey, you don't want to be the reason your company gets breached, don't click on this link, you know? Okay, cool. Matt, yeah.
Just one more. First of all, great talk, thanks. I was just wondering, in your experience, how open are CISOs to have a psychologist consultant? I think the data you presented is the solution to the problem very obvious. But how open are these guys to have a psychologist consultant?
Yeah, this is a really great question. You said psychology consulting, right? Is that what you said? Yeah, so it's a really great question. To be clear, I'm not a psychology consultant. I don't really know much about psychology. I just read things. But honestly, so in terms of actual psychology consulting, I guess I don't know because it's not the field that I'm in. I haven't tried that. But I am in the field of just cyber consulting in general. And so sometimes I'll bring these like types of solutions up to CISOs. And again, vendor agnostic, so I'm not necessarily promoting one solution or the other, but I'll introduce them to this concept of, hey, there are solutions that do more of this gamification, do more of this real-time learning. And to that, I found them incredibly receptive, especially because at the end of the day, what I think genuinely is a CISO should be and usually is more business-driven, so also cost-cutting driven. And what I've seen is that if a CISO can replace something like a KnowBe4 with the same line item budget for a product that also provides content and phishing, but then goes above and does this gamification, which is what I know a lot of these startups are trying to do, they're very open to that because now they're not paying any more. They're getting the same functionality plus some. So for that reason, I've seen them be really open to it. But again, I do think it's because it still is a little bit of a business decision. So in terms of actual psychology consulting, I would say probably their openness would depend on the ROI of it, honestly. That's just how I see a lot of CISOs operate. But, yeah. Cool. Okay, well, thank you, everyone, so much.
Yeah,